Good morning, and I have Grant Wiese here with me, and we today are trying to do something a little bit different for our fractal audience and our fractal farmers. We're sitting down with leading thinkers, doers in the agriculture space to discuss nuts and bolts of how we would build a growth playbook, or that's, I guess, what we call it, of essentially just taking the learnings we have from a lot of our different farms and folks that work with some of the leading farms and package them together so that we can learn from each other. Today, sitting down with Grant Wiese, who leads Farm 640. It's a business dedicated to equipping farmers with the essential tools and resources they need throughout the farm buying process. Grant, it's great to talk to you yet again here today.
Thanks for having me, Ben. I'm looking forward to it.
So we've had a chance to talk, I don't know how many times, whether it's a side conversation and webinars, back and forth on Twitter, I guess it's X now. But I think one thing I haven't dove deep on, but I think provides a lot of color about all the work you do at 640 and just more broadly is, how have you personally gotten into farmland? Not just farming, but farmland as an area of focus for you in your career?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I am situated in central Nebraska, is where I reside, and grew up on a farm in northeast Nebraska. So the background's always been there with row crop and livestock. Got my major in agribusiness and have been involved in lending for 14 years now. So I'm able to work with a lot of producers and get a lot of unique ways of getting into farmland. But for my personal journey, I suppose I'd probably back us up to about 2018. At that particular point in time, married, just bought a house, just had our first kid, and was looking to invest, kind of expand. I had the profession going, but wanted to get into real estate. I knew the value of real estate from its potential in investing and growing. And really, honestly, I just sat down for 4 hours and I decided, do I want to get into commercial real estate or do I want to get into farm ground? Which direction do I want to go? And I remember just that particular day sitting down and kind of going through the pros and cons and knowing that I had the area of expertise in ag, farm ground, and the family operation back home. So I decided that day to ask my family if I could rent some farm ground for them. So that was really just the start in making up my mind of asking my family if I could add some acres so that I could be potentially eligible for some FSA financing in the future. So that was a key moment for me to decide which direction I'd be heading in the future and getting back involved with the family operation after being away for a little while and being in the egg lending side of things.
I think what's so interesting there is, it clearly is something that's very personal for you, but you also kind of came at the problem with a very financial or kind of data-driven mindset of kind of like backing up what makes sense and then like what are the levers to pull going in. And I guess when I look at what you're doing at Farm 640 and kind of the farm buying toolbox that you have there, like I see that in the work and the conversations. Can you just give like just a brief overview for folks that maybe aren't as familiar? What's Farm 640? What's the farm buying toolbox? What are you trying to get across in all that? So you don't have to describe everything in detail. Like, what are you trying to do here?
So, no, that's a great question. I think the best way to explain that, I'm just going to continue on with my journey, my farmland buying journey. So you can see maybe some of the experience and moments that I have and how I'm bringing those forward to ag producers. So the goal was to rent farm ground, which I was able to do for my family. And I rented that ground for 2 years, was able to pull a small profit. And after 2 years of farming, I was eligible for FSA financing, the joint financing program to help young producers buy ag real estate. And that winter, right after my second year, I was eligible and actually ended up winning the bid on auction to buy what was 68 acres. At that time, 41 acres farmable, 68 acres on a county line, so short 80 there, that needed a ton of sweat equity. It was a farm that laid flat and had some really good dirt, but had a lot of trees, had a building on it, had fence lines with trees, and were just a lot of improvements to the property. And that's the nice thing about my experience in working with as many forward-thinking producers as I do. I knew the value of the sweat equity property, went in, put some cash towards it, made some improvements, grew the value of that property. And within 2 years, I knew that I was ready for something else. It wasn't a farm that I was next to that I could take care of from a sweat equity standpoint every single year, but I knew that I could manage about 120 acres. I could roll up into about 120 acres at that point in time. So I started looking at that range and actually won the bid on 112 acres after 2 years, won the bid and did a 1031 exchange into that next property. So every 2 years, I'm able to continue to grow the operation and do something different. The sweat equity allowed me to actually pull cash out during the 1031 exchange. So I paid $50,000 at the loan closing, and that allows me to operate on cash going forward. I'm not tapping into my operating line of credit. I'm not paying interest. I'm actually earning interest on a monthly basis. Um, improve my cash position and kind of stabilized myself financially by doing that because the farm still cash flows, even though it's a bigger farm. I'm in a strong cash position. And so it's taking these experiences that I've learned with other producers on how they use these resources, these lending resources and creative financing to grow not only my own operation, help the producers that I work with from a lending standpoint, but I'm putting that onto Farm 640 to help the next generation coming back to the farm have confidence and the know-how to buy the previous generation out. That's really the goal and why I have this Farm 640 is to help the next generation keep the family farm in the family and give you the resources to grow because there are a ton of ways to do it if you just know how.
So one of my favorite things, but also some of the most frustrating things about agriculture is sometimes, you get folks who are like, sure, that works for somebody else. Like that works as a one-off. Where does that fit? Grant, yeah, sure. You had your banking background. You got to see all this. That's just a one thing, I guess. When I was thinking about kind of your story and just the conversations we've had and everything I just heard in that, and like my answer to that is, you clearly had a plan. Yeah. And I think I asked you a question. I think it was the last time that we were just kind of riffing on the market. And I asked what's the single most important thing you see in an operation that's going to be around in 20 years? And you said something about proactivity or a plan. Can you kind of just talk about both within your own experience, but especially when you think about farms in general, those operations that'll be here in 20 years? Why does having a plan, a vision, like what does that mean to you, and why is that so important? And then tie it back to kind of like what you're trying to do with kind of Farm 640.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a huge difference maker because when you think about it, when you have a goal in mind and a plan in place to get there, you tend to get there a whole heck of a lot faster. So something that seems overwhelming, maybe it's you want to add 400 acres in the next 20 years. But if you have a plan in place and you prioritize and execute on getting to that point, you might be able to achieve that 20-year goal in 5 years. It's crazy to see, but that's the fun of the proactive producer that I work with is I've got some producers that aren't proactive that have been complaining about not being able to find anything to buy or grow into for the last 5 years, and I hear it every single year. And then I have producers who are in their mid-30s who are buying 4 pieces of ground at this very moment. And the deals find them and they find ways to get things done. And so you have to keep learning. You have to keep growing and evolving as a business person. And farming is an extraordinary business. It takes a ton of capital to be involved, and that's where you want to arm yourself with as much knowledge as possible to help you achieve these goals and find yourself in a stable financial position.
Yeah, I think when I came back in agriculture, I was pretty ignorant. Previously, I'd been working across private equity and mining, and I just kind of assumed that everybody kind of had a growth playbook that they followed. And I know there's a lot of different variations for different operations, different local markets, but kind of folks kind of knew what their 3 or 5 year plan was. Because if you're working in a mine site, very similar economics to farming, albeit corporations to individuals. But you're dealing with highly volatile commodity markets. You have new capex that comes up. Stuff breaks down, you have, mine estimates are wrong, yields are wrong, like a lot of similarities that exist there. And we were out building 5, 10, 15-year plans that, we would execute in different ways under different market conditions. So I was like, all right, yeah, they don't need all the bells and whistles, but like folks have a kind of a core plan. How many folks that you talk to do you think actually have a growth plan at even 3 years out or 5 years out, even amongst like high quality producers?
That's a very small number. Even finding individuals who have an extremely detailed projection, an income and expense projection for the upcoming year is fairly few and far between. So it's, it's definitely hard to find that number and that growth plan. If you don't even have a plan for 1 year out, how are you supposed to have any idea of what the operation looks like 3 years out and 5 years out? And that's maybe the starting point is, you have to get that vision out there of where you want to be or where you think you need to grow to be sustainable. And then it just comes down to the daily action. It's taking care of what's in front of you today. It's putting that break even buy field together, for your operation so that you can really nail it down this year and next year and the year after to help achieve that goal. You can break those big goals down into daily action to help you get there.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing you say is like, all right, we don't need to get to our like perfect forward projection, spreadsheet and nerdiness of like we think we know exactly where working capital position will be in 3 years under like 15 different scenarios. That's not what we're saying here. What we're saying is like what are the basic nuts and bolts, right? Like what's the vision on, what do you think a rough farm size that you would like to be at for, that fits the vision of your farm and the type of operation you want to have. And then like what are literally the steps you need to get there. Let's like talk about a couple of those steps. And I think we've talked about this in a couple of different venues, but I'd love from everything from kind of like the financials to the vision, what you need to do to engage with your bank. Yeah, let's maybe just start with a couple of those tangibles, just to make this as tactical as we can.
Yeah. So which steps specifically are you looking for?
Where would you start? I guess, it's like let's say I'm a 3,000 acre operation in a market where, average farm size of a commercially viable farm is probably like 400 or 500. Maybe I'm a next gen. I've had the farm for a little bit. So probably a little bit younger than the average on the farm side, which doesn't take much always. And I know that I need to grow because I know that, my margin structure might not be perfect or maybe I'm looking at bringing one or maybe even two kids back to the farm. And I know to support that needs to grow. Like where should I even start when I
Yeah.
think about that being prepared?
Well, this might be an obvious question because of who you're talking to, Ben, but I'd say you need to really nail down and have a good understanding of your financial position today. So if you don't know if you're in a strong position to grow or a tight position, or you think, oh, I can grow, it'll be fine, my lender always approves me. No, you need to know, about your working capital, your owner's equity, you need to know what your cash flow looks like, and you've got to nail down those figures and make sure that you and your lender or someone else that's going to be helping you get there are all on the same page, because you can want to grow and know that you need to add 300 acres in the next 5 years. But if you're drowning in debt, you've got to take care of, plan A right in front of you. You've got to take care of what you've got in front of you here, and make sure that you're secure first financially. The first thing is to make sure you're secure financially. And then once you are in a position where you get the green light to, yes, we have some room to grow here, know how much you can grow and how quickly you can grow. You need to be on the same page with your lender and work together as a partner. And that's very important. It's important to know how quickly you can grow and what that growth can look like, so that you can take those baby steps, I guess, going forward, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we talked a lot about farm growth in an early webinar we did in a lot of conversations with farmers. And I think sometimes when folks in the ag community hear growth, like they get this assumption where it's not disciplined. And that's not what we're saying here. What we're saying is you want to secure that operation, the family legacy, and just, you want to run a good business. And you're not gonna push it above the bounds of what you have.
Yeah.
You're not trying to be driving at 120 miles an hour down the freeway with everything rattling about to fall off. But you want to know what those bounds are, and that's the first step. And that is a proactive, it's a conversation and explicit alignment. And sometimes we don't like to have those tough conversations, with the banker. So that way, if an opportunity comes up, what those limits are. Yeah. And then I think the other thing that I really liked about what you talk about a lot in your newsletter and your blogs, and I know is in the toolbox, there's some tools that can kind of take that a little bit further. Mm-hmm. Whether that's, the right way to expand kind of your working capital position through rent, whether it's, trading land from, further out in your radius to inside, those improvements, the sweat equity that you already talked about. There's a lot of other finding creative partnerships Like, I think it's that combination is that discipline, but the creativity that really is a good start. And I think that was kind of the thesis for us when we started Fractal was, hey, we're not a silver bullet. I want to take those good cash flows that you have and take them further. So that way you can, grow your operation. And I need you to win a little bit more than we do, because otherwise we wouldn't be providing our value. I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of different examples of where that fits.
Well, Ben, you read my mind there because that I guess was going to be my step two. As far as was what you need to do, you need to understand the financials, and then you need to learn how to grow and learn how to grow the right way. And that's by understanding that there are hundreds of different ways to grow. You can bring in equity partners, you can bring in just partners in general, you can buy on contract, you can grow via renting. You don't have to actually buy the ground, you can grow via 1031 exchange. And so when you have 15 different ways to buy ground, suddenly you have 15 more ways to buy ground than the person next to you. And so while you might both be in the same financial position and they only have two ways to know how to buy ground, if you have all of these extra arrows in your quiver, it gives you a lot of opportunities to move forward with something that, maybe no one else is thinking about. Maybe you are buying the ground 3 counties away that no one in your community has any interest in at all, buying that ground, 1031 exchanging, or doing just a swap with a local landlord and getting the ground that's 2 miles away because you bought the ground, 3 counties away. Just being able to be aware of the many different ways that you can pull these things off really gives you a leg up. And I'd say that's kind of the next step is broadening your horizon on how you can grow.
So I'm gonna go a little bit off script because we haven't talked about this in a little while. Hey, markets that we're in right now. We still have low commodity prices. Break evens in a lot of areas don't reflect, current, on rented ground. You're really tight if you're even there. And even on owned ground, it's a pretty tough spot, and working capital is tight. How do you think about this conversation in a market like we have today?
That's a really good question, and it's obviously going to depend on what you've done maybe over the past 2 years. I know 2012 was an extremely profitable year, depending on the stats you're looking at, maybe the most profitable year ever from a row crop operation in the Midwest. So there are a lot of producers who have cash still stockpiled, but we have had a few rough years between 23 and 24, depending on how you handled purchases, equipment upgrades, and improvements. Yes, your break even might be really tight. You might have blew through a lot of that working capital and burn through it to where you don't have that much available. So, it comes back to making sure we're taking care of that profitability here in year one. Know your break evens, fill that cash flow out to the best of your ability, and put realistic numbers in there. I mean, don't fill your cash flow out for your lender or someone else. Be realistic and true to yourself. Have a firm idea of where you're sitting right now, and plan accordingly. Plan accordingly. So, let's get those numbers up to speed right now. There's definitely still potential to make some purchases out there. Like I said, the working capital was strong a few years back, and so there might be some equity buildup over the past couple of years. You just have to be diligent with your numbers and be a little bit creative. Maybe it's not going outright and buying 80 acres, but maybe it is giving up 40 acres or selling a corner that you have on a property to get into that next property. So you don't have to go and put yourself in a really tight financial position. You just have to be creative and explore the options in front of you.
Yeah, I love that nuance of, where is the discipline and not backing yourself into a corner, but also being, we've talked about preparation, being ready to seize that opportunity. And, I think, you being in Nebraska, everyone loves to quote Warren Buffett, and so few people are able to follow it, right? Be greedy when others are fearful. Well, everyone wants to expand when corn's, at $7, and everybody's able to. And that's why we see, you're going to burn through a lot of cash doing that. I think we have the privilege at Fractal of working with a lot of very innovative operations all over the broader Corn Belt and the broader Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
And just, farms that I've spoken to just in the last week and a half, off-market deals, retiring or kind of silent retirements is kind of a trend that I think we will see articles about this in 3 or 4 months about silent retirements that are happening, and land is transacting. And the amount of times that I pull up comparable sales from county records and show that to a farmer after they tell me that no land has transacted, and they look at it and they're like, holy cow, look what's happening. I think, very similar to 2013 to 2016, a lot of operations really made decisions there that set them up for not just success in the decade, but the generation in that point. I think we're at a very similar inflection point. And so I think, what you're doing at Farm 640, very timely. I think the idea of getting prepared, being disciplined and aligned with that banker is very timely. And hopefully you're able to find capital partners, whether that's someone like us at Fractal or someone else, to seize that, because we know that land doesn't transact very often. And so there's a very unique window. And I think that's one of the toughest things about the agricultural industry, is that decisions have to be made really rapidly, and they can have often multi-generational implications. And that's not the same as, running a big corporation that you're going to leave in 5 or 10 years. It's a very different ballgame. So, I guess if we're going to, just as we kind of wrap up, and you're going to kind of give a bit of a call to action, not just on what you're doing, but in general to a farmer that you were talking to. I mean, what's kind of your, we'll call it the going down elevator pitch as we wrap this thing?
Yeah, I'd say there's two strategies that could work really well, and you're absolutely right. Over 50% of the purchases of farm ground are happening privately, so you'll never see them, hear about them. So be ready to grow and get the word out there that you're trying to grow, because if these private parties don't know that you're an interested buyer, you're not going to get called. You're going to miss out on over half the deals. The other thing in a downward trending environment is look for those properties that need improvements or sweat equity, because the most valuable or the best properties will come down the slowest in value, but the weaker properties will take the dip first, fastest, and furthest. So find those properties that need the sweat equity. You'll probably be able to get those on a discount, put a little bit of cash into them to fix them up, and consider that your springboard for your next quarter. Even if it's 67 acres that are super awkward and need cleaned up, if you can afford to buy that today, that might be your down payment for the quarter 3 years from now, if you put the time and effort into it.
Yeah. And I love the way you think, again, even in how you're articulating that for right now, you're thinking about the next step along with it. And so I guess the way that I look at it from my call to action from a Fractal standpoint is, go have that conversation with the banker, know how much you can get. And then I have the conversation with us or somebody like us, and understand how far can that stretch. And so kind of where those limits are, and you're able to plan not just for this transaction that you might be able to swallow with your existing playbook, but get to the next one as well, because you don't know when that's coming. And if you can be proactive, you might even be able to get 3 in a way that you'd only get 2 if you were reactive. But Grant, as always, I really appreciate you taking the time, talking to our folks. Where can folks go to learn a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ben. I appreciate the time. You can find me at farm640.com. So that's farm640.com. If you go there, you can sign up for my weekly newsletter. It goes out to about 1,200 individuals, where this week was about 1031 exchanges and the pros and cons of that. But it's the point is to give producers the financial acumen to buy ground, and the examples. I give a ton of examples on buying ground and creative ways to do it. So we're trying to put that arsenal in your pocket there, so you can grow. If you're super interested in learning more about the Farm Buying Toolbox, you can click on that tab on the website as well, and then you'll be signed up to know when that is becoming available for you to purchase, because that has all the shortcuts to grow your operation. Let's just call it that. And then you can also follow me on Twitter at Wiese Farms.
I would encourage the Twitter follow and everything Grant just said. I've learned a ton from what you're doing. Again, thanks for the time. My name is Ben Gordon. I'm the CEO, co-founder of Fractal. To any of the farms that we're talking to, we'd love a chance just to understand what that vision is, what that playbook is. But make sure you're having that conversation with that banker first, because that's that first fundamental step. Thanks, Grant. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
Appreciate it. You too, Ben.